Good morning, everybody. Another great episode of GoJo and Golic coming your way today. Here's what you have to look forward to on today's show. Half past Sixers. The photo here was actually supposed to be Joel Embiid, but he was late. Do you get what I'm saying? We'll talk about that one. Plus, Lane Kiffin says he doesn't even want to go to the SEC championship game. Okay, we will break down what that's all about. And Daryl Johnston, Cowboys legend, will be joining the program. So much good stuff coming your way right now.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield here. We're presented by Campbell's Chunky, soup that eats like a meal, and we got a great show for you today. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Subscribe to the new YouTube channel. We appreciate everyone that has so far. Jesse mentioned Daryl Johnston has come here on a very interesting day. It is like a choose-your-own adventure of incredible sports talk hits concepts that we've got going on. We can workshop if he thinks Deion Sanders as the head coach of the Cowboys is actually a real thing, because we get to say that today. We could certainly look at what's gone on in the NBA with Joel Embiid and the Sixers. And oh, by the way, Dad's Cleveland Cavaliers snapped their 15-game winning streak last night against the Boston Celtics in a game where the Celtics shot 63% from three in the first half of that game. So plenty to get to there. But Dad, in addition to all that and the college football playoff rankings that came out, the Jets decided to fire someone else. And it seems now we are really, with the New York Jets, venturing into, I shouldn't say uncharted, because they're pretty charted with some of the owners that we've had around here. David Tepper been in the news a lot lately, obviously. We deal with Jones almost every week. But Woody Johnson and the stories coming out of the New York Jets as they have now fired their GM, Joe Douglas, in addition to what they've already done this year with Rob Saleh, as this team continues to send all the signals that they are getting ready to burn it down going into next year. Dad, the stories now coming out, including by our own Diana Rossini, friend of the program, over at The Athletic, seem to indicate that a lot of this is tied to Woody Johnson coming in and trying to put his fingerprints all over the decision-making of this team, forcing them to have a practice during the bye, making the decision unilaterally to fire Rob Saleh without consulting Joe Douglas at all. The writing seemed to be on the wall. Were you still surprised to see this move made during the season, knowing that his contract, kind of like Mike McCarthy we always talk about, could have just run out at the end of the year? He didn't have a contract beyond going into 2025.
No, I'm not surprised, because this is the time where you make firings so you can look around for hirings. They fired him. That's like they fired Saleh. So you can look for a head coach. You can look for a GM. Now, you're not supposed to be talking to another GM who is employed, but we know that it kind of backdoors those things. So that's one of the reasons that you fire, and you'll see other head coaches fired with weeks to go in the season. The firing's not over. It's so a team can openly look for a coach or a GM. But this team, the dysfunctionality of this team, 6 weeks ago, Woody Johnson called this the best roster he's had in 25 years of ownership. 6 weeks ago. And we know of Aaron Rodgers' quote, "If I don't do what I'm capable of doing," he said, "we're all probably going to be out of here." He's more right than Woody Johnson, that's for sure. They're all going to be out of here. And Woody Johnson taking control. Now, remember, and he was the ambassador to the United Kingdom from 17 to 21 when Donald Trump was the president last time. So Christopher Johnson, his brother, is the one who made the Adam Gase hire, the Robert Saleh hire, the Joe Douglas hire. The last hire that Woody Johnson made was in 15 when he hired Todd Bowles and Mike McCagnon as the GM and Bowles as the head coach. So now Woody, he may get the same post with the United Kingdom, but it seems he's going to be making the decisions before that comes, before he leaves and kind of moves. You know, the acting owner then will be his brother Christopher. But yeah, it seems like Woody Johnson is taking the bull by the horns here. And listen, it's not even, to me, we can discuss it, but Aaron Rodgers is not going to be the quarterback of the Jets next year. There's just no way that you start with a new GM, start with a new head coach, and bring back your 40-year-old Achilles healing, non-movable, not as good as he once was quarterback to start a new regime. It's just not going to happen.
Well, Dad, I believe you, because if you believe the reporting, and again, Zach Rosenblatt and Diana Rossini co-authored the article that you should check out over at The Athletic. If you believe that, Woody Johnson almost wanted Aaron Rodgers to not be the quarterback back in September. He said they called the coaches in the article that they wrote. The coaches were called in by Woody Johnson to explain their 10-9 home loss to the Broncos. And according to this report, during the meeting, Woody Johnson suggested the coaches bench Aaron Rodgers in favor of Tyrod Taylor because they felt Rodgers' performance was holding them back. The coaches and everyone involved, obviously stunned, didn't like the idea of that early already cutting bait here. But, Dad, if that was the indication we got then from Woody Johnson, that's even remotely the sentiment, even if it wasn't specifically that granularly true, you're absolutely right. This is going to be the end for everyone involved in this regime because, Dad, for Joe Douglas, he was the scapegoat on this. It sounds like towards the end, Woody Johnson took over a lot of decision-making. But listen, Joe Douglas was by no means perfect. Yes, had a stellar draft a couple of years ago when he brought in, Sauce Gardner on defense, Garrett Wilson on offense, both the rookies of the year on their respective side of the ball. But you never got the O-line worked out. Certainly the quarterback position. How much influence he had in that was Zach Wilson, but it's a decision he's associated with. There are areas you can point to that were ultimately failings that get most GMs fired when your wagon's hitched to the quarterback. But now you're looking at this situation going forward and trying to figure out what the hell they do. They are going to be doing it with all new parts and all parts being chosen by the owner of the team, which almost never feels like a good idea given their actual aptitude for football.
Yeah, and the last time I mentioned he did it in 2015, he had consultants, Charlie Castlery and Ron Wolf. That's what was his sounding board. Those were his consultants before he hired McCagnon and Bowles. And it sounds like he is going to make all decisions again if and when he goes off to be the ambassador of the United Kingdom again, that he's going to make all the football decisions before he goes. And he's basically now, the question will come down, is he going to hire a GM first and then the GM hires the coach? Either way, the marching orders are going to be start with a new quarterback, get a different quarterback, and let's start to rebuild this thing. Now, the normal way is to hire a GM first and let the GM hire a coach, but we know that's not always been the case.
Certainly has been. So Joe Douglas finishes 30-64 as the Jets GM. Phil Savage is now going to be the interim GM. And Dad, what you just described, the environment there, I understand there are only 32 of all these jobs, so someone is always going to sign up for it. But man, it feels like you're buying a ticket on the Titanic, signing up for the Jets in this environment where we're now talking this openly about the owner's influence on everything that just happened and the team going forward. It sounds like a nightmare, and it's really a situation, Dad, that's going to have to be tailored, I think, for a veteran coach who's able to withstand this, who really knows what they want, or a coach that's on a second or third chance and desperate for any opportunity that's going to come their way. And I'm sure that's why for a lot of people, Brian Flores, who's talked openly about a guy who wants to get back into coaching, wants to be a head coach again, has had all the success and acclaim as the Vikings head coach, but we mentioned with Fitz the other day, has the complications of the lawsuit with the league. This could be a job where Brian Flores, unfortunately, and we'll see. I mean, I would hope he's got a robust market this offseason, and that based on what we've seen from Brian Flores, the coach, in these last couple of seasons with the Minnesota Vikings, everyone would look and say, well, why wouldn't I want to sign up for that? The guy also had plenty of success on the field winning in Miami, but that I think is going to be coaches that are looking for another opportunity, thinking maybe they never get one, who the Jets are going to have to major in, because I don't know what coach with options would look at this team and say yes.
Well, I mean, we know who the hottest candidate is going to be, right? It's going to be Ben Johnson again. Ben Johnson was one of the hot candidates last year, and he didn't take a job. He wanted to go back to Detroit. They're firing on all cylinders. If they were to close the deal out, I would imagine Ben Johnson. Now, Ben Johnson's going to have choices because there are already multiple spots open, and there's going to be more spots open. And we know what usually a head coach looks for: ownership, what kind of team, what kind of cap space, and basically who's the quarterback. And for the Jets, it's going to be no one is the quarterback. You have basically carte blanche to get whatever quarterback you want. So I get what you're saying about a second or third run coach or an experienced coach, but Ben Johnson's going to be the hot name. And I would imagine Woody Johnson, like all the other owners.
The Jets don't have a realistic chance for Ben Johnson or any of the good candidates that are going to have a choice of their team. None of them were going to take this job ever.
I would agree. And plus you're going to have to wait on Ben Johnson. And that's another thing. Is as the season ends and Detroit keeps playing, you have to wait at least an amount of time. Now I know they're massaging the rules so these coaches from teams that go on to the Super Bowl don't get basically screwed as much as far as hiring of coaches that don't even make the playoffs. But you do roll the dice a little bit if there are multiple teams left and you're waiting for Ben Johnson.
Yeah, so waiting for Ben Johnson sounds like the Netflix reality series targeting the NFL fan base. Maybe that can be the Hard Knocks for the offseason, Dad. The beginning of the offseason, since you like the Giants one so much, we can get the start of the offseason that's really just titled Waiting for Ben Johnson. So while we do that, we can try and diagnose what exactly happened with this New York Jets team, where it all went the most wrong outside of the entire history of the franchise that, according to Stu Gatz, who, again, Nostradamus, whatever you want to call him, Stu Gatz, the author of a great new book, his personal record book, which you should check out, accurately predicted at the beginning of this that the Jets can't have nice things, that something was going to go wrong, and eventually it did. And Diana Rossini, who we've referenced a couple of times here, senior NFL reporter over at The Athletic, was on with the Dan Le Batard Show guys yesterday and talked about one of the key failings of this version of the New York Jets in the last couple of seasons. Take a listen.
Aaron Rodgers, will he be back next season? And if so, will it be with the Jets?
I don't know. I don't think the Jets know if they want him back, and I don't know if Aaron Rodgers knows if he wants to. I just think his options aren't going to be what they were. The New York Jets signed up for an MVP caliber quarterback.
Yep.
They did not get an MVP caliber quarterback. That is not what we've gotten on, we'll just say in this last year. Last year is a wash. So I still think the next few games here are going to be really important for the Jets organization in terms of what they want to do next at quarterback. But I can tell you that I don't think it's a lock that these guys come back together next year.
Now, Dad, I probably think it goes deeper than that. I think this really started to go downhill when you had Zach Wilson as your second draft pick, and that flamed out famously. Usually it's when your drafted pick, your guy that you take and try and make homegrown, is the one that fails. But the Aaron Rodgers situation, while yes, there's no doubt, Diana is completely accurate there, did not play up to the level that they were expecting when they brought him over. Part of that is just the unfortunate snap of an Achilles before the beginning of last season that really robbed the Jets of what was probably their best look at this. The O-line probably still wasn't going to have been good enough last year overall to have gotten it done, but Aaron Rodgers, now being his age with the limitations that come with an injury like that, have certainly robbed them of any chance they had of the quarterback he once was, it seems.
Yeah, and now you and listen, while I we have Diana on all the time, and she says doesn't know, and I'm sure there is some that don't know, but I think it's over. I do not think Aaron Rodgers will be back. I don't think the Jets are going to want him back. I think it's a fresh start for them. Who knows where they're going to pick in the draft? They have 3 losses. There's 5 2-loss teams. There's a couple of other 3-loss teams. Not all the 2-and-loss teams are going to be looking for quarterbacks. And this quarterback class is considered, a weak class compared to last year. So do you go with the free agent route? Do you go with the draft pick? I personally do not think there is any chance. I don't know if I'm going to go as far as on God's green earth. I think I may. That Aaron Rodgers is not with the Jets next year. This is going to be a clean sweep.
It is. I completely agree with you. I don't think Aaron Rodgers will be back. And like you said, the sort of clock ticking on Woody Johnston's availability to do this before he'll likely have to turn the reins over to Christopher if he's named the UK ambassador again is interesting. I went to our resident Jets fan in Stu Gotts, and I asked him if the years are any different depending on which Johnson you had in charge. And he said they've all been horrible regardless of the Johnson. And so for this next iteration of the Jets, Dad, we could talk about the young pieces that they might potentially have on this roster to build around here. We know you've locked up guys long-term on defense like Quinnen Williams. You've drafted very well along the defensive front. Will McDonald starting to produce some this year. You had Jermaine Johnson last year that really showed up on the scene. I know he's had a tough year this year, but Sauce Gardner, defensive rookie of the year just a couple years ago. And on offense, you've got some guys to build around as well. But overall, again, when you just look back up at the top of this team, it's going to be very hard to go and put together the kind of roster that wins games consistently when you've got someone in the chair in ownership who appears this meddlesome with the process at every step of the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of those you would want Woody or Christopher. It seems it's going to be Woody to hire a GM and get out of the way. Right. But we know that that's not always the case. Those who sign the checks can have as much power as they want, i.e. see the Cowboys. So that's what matters here. Will Woody Johnson get consultants again to pick the next GM and the next coach, and what order will it happen? But I agree. From the D-line to Sauce Gardner to Garrett Wilson to Breece Hall, they have some young talent on that team. Certainly the O-line needs help. They tried to piece it together with some veterans, and it's not really working out. But they do have some young talent on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, even the O-line, like they drafted Olu Fashanu out of Penn State to be the backup behind the two guys. Now, been pressed into duty because you've got Tyron Smith dealing with that neck injury, and these guys have been banged up, as we unfortunately, could predict at the beginning of the season. So you've got tentpoles in all the right places in some of the young talent on your roster to build around. That part's certainly appealing, but you said the real roadblock that's coming up is we're staring at a draft class right now that quarterback-wise looks like it's really going to be, I'd say, shallow in terms of the top-end talent that's available. So if you're not within arm's reach of those first couple of picks where these quarterback-needy teams are going to be going and reaching for the likes of Shedeur Sanders and others, you're probably going to be in trouble. And then I don't know what the veteran market looks like in this next year for quarterback. The other interesting part of this, Dad, and I'll be curious, to talk to Moose when he's on with us later, as someone that's, around calling games like you are and surveying the landscape of the league, is what this means for the future of Aaron Rodgers. Like, is he content to go out like this? Because part of what Diana described in that article was this team didn't want to embarrass a future Hall of Famer by benching him after 4 weeks. This is a guy who I'm sure tried to come back at the end of last year because he's got the pride and competitive desire. Is this going to be the way Aaron Rodgers decides he's comfortable going out, or is he going to try and latch on with another team, and who would actually be willing to take him at this point?
And let's understand, him latching on with another team or another team actually going after Aaron Rodgers would have to be a team that feels he can play near his best and is close to making a run. Because Aaron Rodgers going to a building team is a worthless endeavor, right? I mean, because he's only going to be there for a year or so. If the team's not going anywhere, why wouldn't you just have a young quarterback? So is there a contending team who is shaky at the quarterback position that would see what has happened the last 2 years with Aaron Rodgers and make even a small investment in Aaron Rodgers? That's to be determined.
Yeah, the last 2 years where you mentioned, he seems like he's been the one picking more of the players than anybody else. So as Woody Johnson fires the GM, Joe Douglas, it seems like the next player personnel decision maker to go will probably be Aaron Rodgers.
Let me tell you, the drama doesn't stop here on GoJo and Golic. So we go from what is definitely a disaster of a Jet season to what feels like it could slowly be becoming a disaster in Philadelphia with the 76ers. So a report came out yesterday, guys, that during a team meeting, Tyrese Maxey called out Joel Embiid for chronic lateness, being late to everything. So after losing another one to the Heat on Monday, what do we make of this drama that's going down in Philly and the fact that it's spilling out into the media? And just a reminder, as Embiid was coming back, Maxey got injured. So we haven't seen Maxey, George, and Embiid all on the court at the same time.
Yeah, this is interesting to watch this come together as the 76ers, as Jesse mentioned with that loss to the Heat, in dead last in the NBA. They are tied with the Washington Wizards, sitting at 2-11. And Kyle Lowry's the one, I believe, that called for this sort of players-only meeting, which isn't surprising. Bad teams love having players-only meetings. It's one of their favorite things to do because certainly winning basketball is not one of them. And in this meeting, Dad, and it is interesting, and for background on this, Shams reported this over at ESPN, Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid have a very close relationship. Like, they've always seemed to have that brother-like relationship. They trust one another, and one of my favorite things about sports has always been when you've got a baseline of trust, you can be more direct and honest with communication in order to try and get results faster. I truly think that conflict is the love language of sports. I've always said that. And so I'm not surprised that Tyrese Maxey was the one bold enough to step up and say it. It's encouraging to see both his development on the court as a player and now clearly his development off the court as a leader for this team, who rightly looked at Joel Embiid and said, man, listen, you're still the guy around here. I might feel like I'm taking the reins on this thing, but Joel Embiid is still the process. He's the emblem of the city. And so what he does has an impact on the rest of this roster, right, wrong, or indifferent. I understand their pros. And so I have zero problem with him calling it out. And it seems like by all accounts, Joel Embiid took this about as well as you can take it. Dad, it's just a matter of if that has any discernible difference or impact on the court, considering Joel Embiid's body is ultimately going to be the thing that decides this season.
Yeah, it seems the window is rapidly closing on the 76ers with Embiid and the injuries. Again, it's kind of like last year when we kept waiting for Dame, Middleton, and Giannis to all get on the court together, and it never really materialized. And here, it's even an earlier now, there is a bright spot. Jared McCain, the rookie from Duke, is certainly stepping up if you want to look at the glass half full on anything of the horrible record. But obviously, this is a team that is trying to build for a championship. And I agree about Tyrese and Embiid. They're good friends, and they hold each other accountable. So you're right. That gave Maxey the kind of the power, the go-ahead to call him out in a meeting because they do hold each other accountable. But as someone who has been a part of these team meetings when things aren't going well, you always wonder about the outcome. Is it just words in a room during that time and then nothing gets done, or does something get done? And that's what we don't know. It's what every player takes from the meeting of who talks, who gets called out, what the remedies are, what the work ethic is after, and is it consistent? Is it an explosion right after the meeting of everybody going, yeah, we're all pulling the chain together, and then does it disintegrate? So you have to wait and see about a team meeting. Team meetings can be iffy. They could just be a way to vent and then nothing happens. You can vent and have something constructive come out of it. This is something we're going to have to wait and see. And we're going to have to wait and see until they're all out together. I think Maxey's like under a week away. It was supposed to be around the end of November that he's supposed to be back with the hammy. So we can maybe finally see these three on the court at the same time, again, with Jared McCain, the rookie, stepping up as well, to see what this team can do and to see if they can find consistency. Because make no mistake, you can have all the team meetings you want. The best elixir for a bad team is to win. That is basically the majority of the elixir. Is if you start winning, then you start buying into what you were saying. But if you're saying stuff in a meeting and you go out and you keep losing, it doesn't mean a damn thing.
No, it doesn't, and we won't see the majority of this because this is about the way Joel conducts himself inside that building. Now, what I will say is, this is the first of these meetings that they're having over the course of a long season, and we have already gotten this leak. Like, we already know about what's going on here, so I have a feeling if Joel Embiid's all of a sudden not doing this again, and the Sixers continue down this path, and we get to December and January, we're probably going to be dealing with one of those, like, I don't know who the NBA's Seth Wickersham is, but those articles where that one guy starts poking around the building, and now all of a sudden we've got a huge, long-worded essay about the failings inside that building culture-wise, because, again, we know so much about this already. But, Dad, the interesting part is, and with Joel Embiid, because I was thinking about this too, like, there's this idea, and we've seen it going back years. I mean, the most heightened NBA example of this was probably the Shaq and Kobe Lakers, right? Where Kobe Bryant famously felt like maybe he wasn't always getting the same effort towards basketball out of Shaq that he was putting in himself. But Kobe Bryant, also one of the leaders on that team, and his work ethic well documented. Plenty of players like this. Sean McVay came out a while back and told the story about how Aaron Donald was late to a team meeting because he had to go and take a crap. And he got to the meeting, and Sean McVay was kind of going to let it slide. And Aaron Donald said, no, you're going to fine me because we have rules and people have to be held accountable. There's a version of sports where we always say, hey, we hear it all the time. It's the huge cliche. Hey, when your best players are your hardest workers, you've usually got great teams. And that's usually true. But when your best players are also prime Joel Embiid, your team can perform pretty well too. And this is a guy who we've seen in the playoffs lay it on the line when he's been injured, score 40 points on a bum knee in series as the rest of that team is sort of falling down around him. So, Dad, Joel Embiid's an interesting case study because we don't know him well enough personally to indict his work ethic or not. There are plenty of people that do that already, so you've heard questions about it, but you don't always have to be the leader to be the best player, but you've got to be the best player, and that's my worry for this 76ers team is because of yet another injury that's mounted for Joel Embiid in his career, we're probably at the point where I feel like this is the 49ers of the NBA where we've passed their window to win with him as their centerpiece.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not closed, it's closing rapidly. And you're right, Joel Embiid, his performance on the court over the last couple of years has been obviously MVP-like. And maybe he's getting comfortable off the court with showing up late, and Maxey called him out for it. Maybe it will. I don't know if reinvigorate's the right word, or maybe a light will go on for Embiid about being on time. I don't know. We don't know what the ramifications are from the meeting, but they're at a point where they felt they had to air out some of their laundry.
Dad, for you played on an Eagles defense with some all-time great players and some big personalities there. I'd have to imagine in that bunch, there were guys that were incredibly talented that maybe weren't day in and day out the most on time or the hardest workers or anything like that. I mean, how do you manage that? How does that actually affect the locker room if you've got a guy as important as Joel that maybe doesn't believe in conducting himself the same way his teammates do?
It got handled in the locker room. That's what I'll just say. It got handled in the locker room. There were more than a few confrontations in the locker room when people thought others weren't doing things the right way or performing the right way. That we had no problem. There were a lot of A personalities on that team, and they spoke up when they felt the speaking up time was right, because we all understood. You have a limited time, and we were a really good team, a great defense, and you had time to kind of make hay, and we would lose in the first round of the playoffs. Buddy would get to the first round and we would lose in the first round. So there was a thought of, we are not playing up to our capabilities, that we're not living up to the expectations of what we think this team is going to do. But there was never a worry, and that was of the three teams I was on, the Oilers, the Eagles, and the Dolphins. The Eagles were by far the team that had players speaking up when they felt they weren't getting their all from everybody out there, whether it was on the field, in the weight room, in the meeting room, that they spoke up. And again, and now that like there was and these weren't meetings at times. These were just confrontations or discussions in the locker room where we didn't have to all get in the meeting room and everybody kind of air out everything. This was just kind of on a timely basis in the locker room. And again, this can happen, but it all depends on what's taken from it. Does Joel Embiid start to show up on time? Again, we can't determine the play on the court because they all haven't been on the court. And Joel Embiid is nicked up, and Maxey is nicked up, and George's coming off being nicked up. So we can't tell the product on the field. This seems to be more a product off the court, as we'll get into about Nick Nurse as well, that seems to all have an effect on the court.
Yeah, no, certainly does. So, Jesse, with that, Nick Nurse also kind of interestingly in the crosshairs here now.
Yeah, so apparently the players also brought up that they want Nick Nurse to coach them harder. So does that sound any alarm bells for you guys? I mean, it's still early. The full team isn't out there, but it kind of seems like a bad thing if your players are coming to you and saying, we need you to coach us harder.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. Now, does that mean there are one or two players that don't want to be coached hard, that Nick Nurse is purposely not coaching hard, so in effect it's having an effect on the team? But yeah, it just doesn't seem normal, Mike, that players go to a coach and ask the coach to up the intensity and up the work ethic during practice.
No, it doesn't. But at the same time, like, I don't know. I look at Nick Nurse, and he's generally coached good teams, and he's also coached them at a high level. I mean, Nick Nurse is a guy who is an NBA champion, so it's not like his style hasn't borne fruit. It's just he's in an adverse situation right now. Everybody in here is responding to different stimulus than usual because this team is capital B bad in a way that Nick Nurse as a coach has not experienced a ton of, and certainly this 76ers core, at least as of late, when you've gotten prime Joel Embiid, MVP form Joel Embiid, hasn't experienced in this same way. And so it's a different challenge for everybody of how to get up off the mat here. But I don't know, the whole coach us harder thing, it is, I think, all a cry. This entire thing can be summed up by the 76ers team right now seems to be plagued by a few things. A lack of attention to detail across the board is certainly high on that list. But like you said, unfortunately, in a league that's largely governed by talent, more of this seems to be about we haven't had the three players we planned on being the core three players out on the court together at this point. And so again, I can only get so up in arms about all of this until we see those guys on the court consistently for a little while. My biggest concern coming off this isn't Joel Embiid showing up to meetings on time, because I don't know what his baseline for that was in the past. I don't know how on time Joel was for everything and what a tone setter he was for the organization in the past as a worker. But I know he could ball. And I know in the biggest moments when the team needed him to ball, even if it was hurt, the man went out there and balled. And so his availability to be that version of the player is far more A, important, and B, at this point, based on the mounting list of injuries, seems less and less likely with each passing day that he will be as available to you as you want in the postseason when they need this all to come together.
And I think the organization and the fans think you're running out of time and options with Embiid, because this is the fourth iteration of trying with a player, right? It was Ben Simmons. It was Jimmy Butler. It was James Harden. Now it's Paul George. And each time it has not worked. So I think there's a come on, let's get going while we can get going with Embiid, and it still may be too late.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that. Again, I think we've been fortunate to have a couple of teams in both the NFL, the NBA, a few of the major league sports that have been together for a while with their cores, that we've gotten to watch these groups go at it, and some of them have ultimately fallen short. And I was just struck as we were getting ready for the show today, thinking about the conversation we had about the San Francisco 49ers the other day. This team that now had gotten infinitely closer to the prize than the 76ers have at any juncture so far during the Embiid process era. But that 49ers team now running up on the edge of a lot of the key players on their roster, ability to go out here and make them into a Super Bowl contender yet again. And it feels like for the 76ers, you're already going to run into the problem that most teams do of, hey, trying to bring over another star level player in Paul George and integrate them into the team right away. But now to do it in the crucible where the foundation, the bedrock of your team in Joel Embiid appears cracked right now, and you haven't even had a chance to put all these guys out there together, it just seems like you're asking an awful lot in really adverse circumstances for this team to make anything of the 2024-25 season. So we're going to have to wait and see more. And like I said, the fact that we're already getting info like this coming out of that means we're probably not done hearing from the Sixers if things continue to go poorly for this team. So we will monitor the situation. I'm sure Shams will keep us up to date on what goes on inside that room. Coming up next, though, let's talk about what went on inside another very important room. Round 3 of the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings came out last night. And surprise, surprise, more people are mad. We'll tell you why next on GoJo and Golic. We will get to the latest fallout from the college football playoff rankings. And man, yesterday was one of them days with college football. I forgot we're in that sweet spot now where not only are we focused on the results on the field, but now we've taken the coaches from politicking just for their team and their conference to trying to devalue conference championships to send a message to committee. It was a messy day for college football online, and we will sort out the trash and tell you what you actually need to know. But, Dad, tough one for your Cavs last night. We were just talking so much about the Sixers, we didn't get to reflect and mourn the fact that the Cavaliers' undefeated start to the season now came to an end against the Boston Celtics, where, man, I don't know how much shame there is in losing to the defending champions who shoot 63% from three in the first half of this game. The fact that the Cavs came back and made this a game at all in the second half is a pretty remarkable indication of just how good that team is.
Yeah, listen, they weren't going 82-0. They were going to lose a game, and they're going to lose a few games. And, you know, you look at the glass half full. Most of the time when the Celtics this year have had a big lead on a team, they've kept it. But Celtics had a 21-point lead that the Cavs cut to 2 in the third and made it a 3-point game at the end. I mean, again, the Boston 22 of 41 from three-point land. Cleveland made 10 of 29. I mean, 12 more threes, 36 more points on threes alone for Boston. They are the three-point shooting team of this era. And when they make them, they're tough to beat. But Cleveland brought it back, made it close, kept it close. So that certainly bodes well for the rest of the season when these two teams keep beating.
Both teams had 6 players in double figures. For Cleveland, all 3 of their bench players in double figures as that group continues to be stellar for them the way they have this season. But man, when Jason Tatum is like this, you can see why so many people get frustrated with why he doesn't do this more often, Dad. 60% from beyond the arc, 50% from the field, taking it to the rack a bunch, using his size and just how physically imposing he is to go and dominate going towards the cup. This was a guy that took control. Him and Jaylen Brown really both took control of this game at so many different junctures for this team. And so you're seeing, whether it's the chip on their shoulders, the experience gained from the championship, in a big-time game, in an NBA Cup game on Tuesday night, those guys looked as dominant as you would expect a backcourt with that kind of experience now into the prime of their careers. And they're going to be hard to beat if those two continue to show up and assert themselves in that same way.
Yeah, Tatum used his size on Donovan Mitchell too, and he drilled him when Mitchell was bringing the ball down. That was like an open field tackle. Brought him down hard. But yeah, listen, we've seen the Celtics do this, so this isn't surprising out of the Celtics getting hot and shooting well. I look at this more as who's the other team, who's the next team, who's the other teams in the Eastern Conference. Will it continue to be Cleveland? Will it be Orlando, the Knicks? You know, we don't think Philadelphia is going to be able to make a run. Milwaukee, those are two teams that we talk about, both sitting near the bottom of the conference. But who's going to challenge Boston this year?
You know what? And right now, I'm still willing to put that on the Cavs. Again, that team looked really strong in the second. Shout out to Donovan Mitchell, by the way, putting on for people with football shoulders. He's always been a guy that's carried more football on his shoulders than he does basketball. Yep. And you saw him put on for the footballing crowd on the basketball court with how physical he continues to play. So we'll wait and see if they can challenge them long term. But one of those fun ones. We talked yesterday with Charlotte a little bit about how do you create interest around the regular season of the NBA. And that was a game that had playoff intensity about it, whether it's the NBA Cup effect or just competitive nature amongst these guys in a matchup of teams that they know are kind of in a similar weight class. It was a fun one there. Jesse, almost as fun as watching a bunch of people in a room yell and scream about which college football playing lads are going to go and be the best at this.
Yeah, okay. So we got some fun stuff going on with the college football playoffs. Fun depending, I guess, on which team you're on. So Boise State jumped BYU for the auto bid and bye in bracket prediction. Tennessee sitting at 11, jumped by both BYU at 14 and Boise in the bracket. So as it stands, Vols fans are probably a little upset that Alabama's sitting at 7th while they're left out of the bracket. Not an easy solution for the 4 SEC teams on the bubble. And like you said, a lot of people unhappy and sort of like, I don't know, arguing about what wins mean what, and do the conference championships mean anything? Blah, blah, blah. Explain this to me like I'm 5.
Yeah, this is where the rubber is starting to meet the road. Now, I'll say this in general. There's been a lot of conversation about Indiana, who checks in at number 5 in this poll yet again, and their strength of schedule, 103rd in the country compared to the SEC. It's going to get sorted out this weekend. I don't know why we're all giving that so much breath. Now, Dad, based on what we saw from this ranking, though, and Jesse mentioned BYU falls 8 spots after their loss to Kansas this last weekend, down to number 14. We saw Tennessee drop 4 spots down to 11, which, as Jesse pointed out, that's in the rankings. In the brackets, where the Big 12 champion is going to get an automatic bid into this, and the highest ranked Group of 5 champion in Boise State is already going to be in that mix, Tennessee is the odd man out. So they would be the first team out because Boise State is in that top 12 and would be getting one of those first round buys that go to the 4 highest ranked conference champions. And so Tennessee is going to be one of those teams leading the charge in a conversation we'll have about the SEC championship and the strength of schedule thing that's coming up here. But if we're going to start with Indiana, who seems to be in the middle of this, Dad, where are you at? They play Ohio State this weekend. They are, I believe, a 13-point underdog on the road in Columbus in this game. And I heard from Greg McElroy on the show last night, Joey Galloway, who was on there, that they believe this ranking is an indication from the committee that even if, let's say, Indiana loses this game by that spread and loses by 2 touchdowns in this one, that Indiana is safe and would still be in the playoff by way of being in the Big Ten. I'm not sold on that based on what we just saw the committee punish a team like BYU for, how far they knocked down Miami for after living by the sword, and then ultimately dying by it against Georgia Tech. Do you think Indiana is safe in the playoff no matter what happens this weekend against Ohio State?
No, not if they get blown out. I mean, first off, I heard Paul Feinbaum basically saying the SEC has played tougher schedules than Indiana and questioning why the SEC is ranked below. Indiana's still in the Power 2 conference, right, of the Big Ten and the SEC, and they're undefeated. They're going to get their love, as they should get their love. So I have no problem with them being number 5. But if their only test of the year is against an Ohio State team whose only loss is a 1-point loss to the number 1 team, and Indiana gets blown out, and their strength of schedule is as bad as it is, and their one test they fail, and if they fail miserably, I could see them dropping completely out. I absolutely could see the committee dropping them, saying, hey, they had their test. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. Here's their test, and they blew it. I think if it's a close loss, they're definitely going to be in. But if it's a lopsided game, I absolutely think they could be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do not think they're as safe as others do, just because, hey, these other teams that we talk about dropping, they've got normal bad strength of schedules. Indiana being in the triple digits for that is going to be a factor, because while some in the SEC bemoan that they don't think that's been nearly a factor, I would say looking at the 1, 2, 3, 4 2-loss SEC teams ranked in the top 10 right now, I kind of disagree with that. There seems to be plenty of credence paid to that fact. I'm just amazed, Dad, because, again, I do think Indiana and Ohio State, that's going to get sorted out this weekend. Now, it sounds like some injuries for Ohio State could play a big factor in this. Indiana's a good team. If you ask me to pick the game right now, I would say I think they lose, but I think they cover, because Ohio State's still ultimately so talented, and that is the area where Indiana falls short. But, man, they're well coached. They got the quarterback. The other wild thing there along the lines of what we talked about with Indiana, are they safe or not, is now you've got all this debate about the quality or the meaning of a conference championship, so much so that Joey Galloway authored the take that almost broke the set last night, that if he was Indiana, he would consider sitting Curtis Rourke for this game, saying the health of your star quarterback is more important than this game, because look what happened to Florida State last year. They got out. In so many ways, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, the 12-team versus 4-team, all these things. But, I think Indiana needs this win. And, Dad, this is what happens, I think, when we all get a little bit too far away from the field. I like Joey Galloway a lot and appreciate his analysis most of the time, but this is a take that you concoct when you're too far away from what's gone on for a while. No team in their right mind, especially in college right now, now would consider doing that with the opportunity that Indiana has in general as Curt Cignetti continues to build this program, that now he's been extended there. They're going to try and keep him around for a long time and build this thing up. You're not going to sacrifice this opportunity, not having your best player on the field. So like you said, if you get blown out and all of a sudden open yourself up to a world full of possibilities you don't want when he could get hurt at any given time.
No, I completely agree. That's just, I think that's also a formula of having just too much time to sit there and think of scenarios. When as former players, Joey Galloway being one, and you and I being others, you want to settle it on the field. You know, you want this chance. Indiana wants this chance to show that they belong as a top 5 team and a team that would move up even further if they were to beat Ohio State. So, yeah, this isn't the time to be playing games.
No, I mean, and again, to the point about injury, it can happen at any time. We just got the report, CBS.com this morning from Sam Cooper, that according to the Columbus Dispatch, Ohio State starting center Seth McLaughlin, the transfer from Alabama, suffered a torn Achilles tendon during practice on Tuesday. It can happen at any time without warning that one of your key players all of a sudden goes down in a way that could affect the rest of the season. So I don't think that's realistic at all. Quite honestly, Dad, in this entire discussion, I'm fascinated by a couple of things here, like big takeaways from the playoff. I'm amazed that BYU got dropped as far as they did when you look at them and Miami on paper, basically the same team in terms of what the committee tends to look at with a lot of these rankings, and yet they dropped like a stone out of the top 12 field, and Miami last time only dropped down to number 8. I'll pull up the numbers right now because we always talk about things all the time, strength of resume, all these metrics, but BYU is 8th in strength of resume, Miami is 9th. When you look at strength of schedule, BYU's 53rd, Miami's 54th. When you look at game control, BYU 15th, Miami 19th, on and on down the list. They are basically on paper the same team. They lost, the loss to Kansas I get is bad because Kansas had 3 wins coming into that one. Georgia Tech had 5 when they beat Miami. I see no discernible difference between these two, and yet one has dropped completely out of the mix, and one in Miami still seems to be allowed to sit around here, and both riding the rails. Both of those teams dealing with close games all along the way that seemed to make a loss feel inevitable. I was a little bit stunned by the treatment that BYU got from the committee last night.
Yeah, I was as well. It just shows what they think of the team and the conference. I mean, they're speaking volumes, even though they're speaking differently week to week. I also think one of the biggest things to keep an eye on, now the matchups aren't going to be the matchups, but I think we're getting close to at least seeing regions that are going to play. Normally in the 4-team playoff, the games were protected by dome or good weather. Right now, your matchups are Big Ten Penn State hosting Georgia, Big Ten Indiana hosting Ole Miss, Independent Notre Dame hosting Alabama. 3 very cold weather cities hosting Southern SEC teams. Now, the Indiana one probably won't hold depending on what happens with Ohio State. That one could change. But the SEC with their 2 losses are going to be they're going to be the visiting, most likely majority of them going to be the visiting teams in the first round, to the probability of very, very cold, possibly cold places and possibly snowy places.
Get ready to learn Midwest, guys. You're right. It's probably going to look very different because of all the results that are coming up. We know that. But, man, fun to think about the idea of the Midwest. And for anyone out there, I have been to State College in Pennsylvania. That is the Midwest. I don't know what you'd consider it, but spiritually, Penn State is the Midwest. And so the Midwest being the host in general of the entire quarterfinal right now warms my very fat heart. Now, to be clear, I don't like playing in the cold either, and I never did, Dad. Nothing about the situation was really enjoyable, but at the very least, we're used to it. I've told the story all the time of playing the Miami Hurricanes in the Sun Bowl in El Paso, and it's 32 and snowing at kickoff, and we look over in the tunnel on one side and see a group of guys trying on cold gear for the first time, it looks like, in their lives, huddled together trying to get warmth like penguins, while we're over here on a slow Tuesday in South Bend getting ready to play this game, going, oh, okay, we've probably won this before it started. It won't be that easy for anyone involved because these are good teams, but it's a reminder that's a factor for some guys that would be dealing for that probably the first time in their life in the most important game of their season.
I think it's a good thing too to have the first round hosted and not go to bowl games. So I think that's a great twist to it.
No doubt about it. So it's an awesome twist in this that we get closer and closer right now, the third round of this ranking, into finding out and deciphering what that picture is going to look like each and every week with the bracket. Coming up next, though, we know this year the 5 conference champions, the 5 highest ranked conference champions, get an automatic bid. The 4 highest conference champions get a first round bye. Is that worth it? One SEC coach says no. Next.
Guys, I think we can all agree if any of us get fired today, please don't let that happen. We probably aren't showing up to work tomorrow. But we're not through and through football, guys, or are we? Check out Biff Poggi. Okay, fired as Charlotte's head coach on Monday, yet still showed up to practice on Tuesday. That is a football guy.
Truly a football guy, and Dad got the warm reception from his team out there in practice too, who, listen, I'd been on a team in college that unfortunately fired our head coach in Charlie Weiss, and you understand as a team, part of this was your failing, so it's nice to see those guys rally in support of one of the best dressed coaches in the sport.
That really is cool that he showed up and got that treatment. That's in a bad moment, that's a good ending.
That is. We will talk.
In a world where we've seen a lot of coaches leave without doing or saying anything, it is pretty endearing. I'll give them that.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Daryl Johnston is going to join us later to talk about the Cowboys' demise, but let's get back to college football at the moment. The SEC Media Blitz is on, for some reason, not exactly sure why. So let's reset the college football playoff rankings. 5 SEC teams are in the top 11. That would mean 4 make it to the playoff, despite Tennessee getting bumped at the moment. So yet we still have people talking strength of schedule, bashing Indiana's record, and now Lane Kiffin says he doesn't even want to go to the SEC championship game.
You know, it's changed. The conference championship, could have a big impact both ways for people. So I've talked to other coaches, so I'll just kind of give you the feeling from some other coaches that, they don't want to be in it. The risk to get a bye, the reward to get a bye versus the risk to get knocked out completely. I mean, that's a really big risk, just to get a bye. So I think it's ended up being a very unique situation of all, postseason sports, the way that system's set up there and how you could go to that and get knocked out. And if you don't go, you're in. And you're going all in the best conference in football, so you got to play somebody great too. Very different than a lot of these other conferences.
So basically, guys, the SEC, because they're beating up on each other this season, are worried that a third loss in the SEC championship would knock a team out of the playoffs, which is a legit concern, but judging by the committee's rankings here, they don't love any of the conferences except for the Big Ten.
I don't think it's a legit concern. Like, this sounds like a team with a police escort complaining about traffic right now. The SEC championship runner-up is not getting left out of the college playoff. I will God's green earth that one for you, Dad. I think we've got a well-worn track record of we've seen 4-loss Auburn teams in the past hanging out in the conversation a lot longer than this. So I don't think that one of these teams right now that, again, Jesse pointed out, 5 sitting inside the top 11, including a Texas team that people have finally started pointing to and talking about, has no earthly real quality win on their schedule. It's purely them and Penn State are like, eye test, right conference, we believe you're pretty good, we're going to go. I'm inclined to think Texas belongs in that more than I am Penn State, but I digress. You've got 5 teams inside the top 11 right now, including 4 2-loss teams. And so if you're telling me one of those 2-loss teams goes and plays Texas in the SEC championship and loses that game to the number 3 team in the country in the SEC championship, that they're getting left out, I got a bridge somewhere I'd like to sell you, because I think this is all, Dad, just right now, pressure from people inside the SEC to try and make sure that the College Football Playoff Committee feels the urgency around making sure that this conference is rewarded for being big and bad and really tough.
There's part of me that understands the concern just because it's a human committee. And, you go into that conference championship game and you say you get blown out and it's your 3rd loss. There is a possibility I think you could get left out, only if you got blown out. Because I pretty much agree with you. If there's a team's 3rd loss is the SEC championship game, I tend to believe that there's a 3-loss team and it's going to be an SEC team, and they would get in, unless it was a bad loss. And that's the thing, you never know. You're basically guaranteed a spot with 2 losses, and there is a chance, if you were to get blown out in the title game, that you could get left out. So and these are, listen, coaches, they microdose everything, every scenario out there, to where the possibility of, if I sit here in the mid-range but in the playoffs with 2 losses, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in the playoffs, even though I may go on the road, but I'm in, as opposed to, if we just have a bad day in that SEC championship game and we get lit up, we could literally be left out. So I minorly see the concern.
So I think this is all right now, the push that we're seeing from this. So again, Lane Kiffin has this banner of, I've talked to a bunch of coaches, and the sentiment is, we don't know if the conference championship is worth it. To me, this is like when the coach grabs an official before the game and says, hey, they've been doing X, Y, or Z to us. They've been holding us here. They've been jumping off sides there. Their offensive linemen's there, because they want you to have a heightened awareness of this. And I think right now the SEC is trying to make sure there is a heightened awareness around the conference championships, that making this game, you guys all love them. The SEC and everybody wants to continue to make the money off having these two good teams square off in their conference and getting to shout the three letters the same way the Big Ten and everyone else does. Want to continue to say this game should be seen as a net positive, that appearing in this game is not going to ding us at all. And I want to be clear, I think a human committee will look at this and say, hey, we're probably not going to downgrade you for this loss as much as we would have otherwise, because we understand by nature of being there, you have accomplished something. That is another resume point of making it to the conference championship. Now, it's complicated this year because that gaggle of SEC teams we've talked about from 4 through 11 have all beaten up on each other, right? You've got this round robin of, well, Alabama's beaten Georgia, well, Ole Miss has beaten Georgia, well, Georgia's beaten Tennessee, and on down this list. And so that might make it a little bit difficult. But, Dad, I still think overall, in a world where we've very clearly seen this is the SEC Big Ten Challenge already, and the people that want to gripe more about where they're ranked and ordered there and which of those actually get to play, you're going to get what you want eventually. We're moving towards the Super League and all of that stuff, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I don't think the runner-up of the Big Ten Championship or the SEC Championship will ever be left out of an expanded playoff field.
I will stop just short of saying ever, because of where. Listen, if OSU beats Indiana, they're gonna be ranked number 2. They're gonna stay at number 2 and play number 1 Oregon for the Big Ten. So you're right, they're not falling from number 2 out. The SEC teams, they really, say Indiana loses to Ohio State, the SEC teams really can only move up 1. If Penn State wins out, if Texas wins out, if Notre Dame wins out, they can really, and Indiana falls after losing to Ohio State. If they lose to Ohio State, Alabama may move up to 6, Ole Miss to 8, Georgia to 9, Tennessee to 10. They're going to be, so those, and I don't know who's getting in the SEC championship. You know, I don't know, might be an 8th ranked team or a 9th ranked team. And like I said, the only way I see them getting dropped is if they get smoked. So that's where I'll stop short of you saying ever an SEC runner-up team gets left out. If for some reason they have a bad game and they get smoked, and they went into that game ranked 8th or 9th or maybe even 7th, they possibly could fall out.
I think the far more interesting scenario is one. I saw Bud Elliott over at the Cover 3 pod mention this the other day. What if Texas loses in the SEC championship?
Yes.
And now all of a sudden Texas has 2 losses and their best win is against Vanderbilt. What are you supposed to do with that? They've been hanging out in that 3 spot for weeks now at 9-1 with a schedule that really, I mean, going back, I was as high on Texas as anybody after they had beaten Michigan, and then Quinn Ewers gets hurt. And ever since then, you know, they put up some big numbers on Florida and others, but it hasn't quite looked the same as I thought it was going to. And so that Longhorns team, Bud Elliott, and the way that he has predicted this out, assuming Texas loses in the Big 12, or excuse me, the SEC championship game, has them getting knocked out of the playoff there. And I think that's the far more fascinating scenario, because for these other teams, Georgia, who we talked about, who's got potential for this, number 1 in strength of resume. Like, everyone looks at their schedule and acknowledges Georgia's been through the ringer. And so I think that is going to give them a fair amount of staying power in this relative to, I mean, the other teams that we're talking about, SMU, that the committee has always kept at arm's reach, BYU, who they just knocked out of the paint here, whose only path in is going to be through winning their conference. Like, the ACC and the Big 12, I think I've been shown enough. You're probably going to be 1-bid leagues that I don't worry about them being knocked out. So Texas is the one in that SEC grouping that I do feel like, oddly enough, despite their number 3 ranking, is sitting on the most interesting terrain heading into the home stretch.
Boy, do you really think they would be, no less than 3 if Ohio State won, that if they lost the SEC title game, they could be out? I don't know.
I think it's at least, because again, that would assume now they've got their 1 ranked opponent left in Texas A&M at the end of the season, which is going to be a rivalry game renewed and all this great stuff. And Texas A&M, which is very important for that game. For Notre Dame, ranked number 15 in the latest CFP poll. So that would be a ranked win. I have a feeling that if Texas A&M lost that game, they're probably not dropping clear out of the top 25 with 3 losses at that point, but will remain to be seen how that win would be legislated come time to do the final rankings that decides the playoff field. And so, Dad, with that win, it would certainly help some, but, and let me check right now too, that game is at Texas, so it would be a home game for them. So it would be a ranked win at home in a rivalry game at the end of the year. It's certainly a firm closing stanza, depending on how they go and work that. But I'd say it's not out of the picture. Again, I don't think they'd fall all the way out of there, but it is a reminder that Texas really does not have a banner win up until this point of the season.
Well, bottom line is we still get on the field play with Texas A&M, Ohio State, Indiana. So the picture, while we take a snapshot of it today, we know the picture is going to change.
Yes, the picture is not only going to change, but Jesse, is inherently very complicated, as we got evidenced by our friends over at the Big Ten.
Yeah, so we're pretty confident that the loser of the championship game over there is still going to make the playoff. That's because after 3 days of sifting through scenarios, they realized Oregon is in the game in all of them, okay? Unintentional comedy there for all the tiebreakers after conference realignment and whatnot. Something all the conferences can agree on here. That's just hysterical.
Yeah, Dad, this is, and I remember like the take that launched 1,000 ships in the last couple of days with the new round of the best versus most deserving debate came from Ryan Russillo. And while I disagreed with some of what Ryan said on this subject here, because we've had this best versus most deserving debate about what cocktail goes into making the CFP field for a decade now, and it ends up getting solved on the field almost every time. So I'm not going to really engage with that until next week. But the one thing Ryan pointed out was the realignment and these massive conferences have created a lot of scheduling challenges, and the Big Ten has been the poster for that this year, with very few of their good teams playing a bunch of the other good teams outside of little crossovers here and there, like we'll get this weekend. And so the fact that in this new world, it took them 3 days to realize that mathematically Oregon was now, no matter what, going to be in the Big Ten championship game, whether that's as the home team in that, or technically the away team, is a hilarious indictment of just how complicated this new world, especially without divisions, has become for these big conferences.
Isn't this just math, right? Shouldn't it be just plugging stuff into a computer and coming out with results? And you seeing Oregon every time in the game? I mean, I'm no math genius. I'm a simple math. I'm very good at simple math. This is way out of my league, but I got to believe there's a formula for figuring this out, that a computer just spits out teams and names. And when Oregon's name continues to come up, you say they're in. It took you 3 days. So maybe your computer was rebooting. I don't know.
I don't know either. It was special to watch. And again, to me, that one is just indicative of, oh, hey, the way they used to do it, where we had divisions. We had a different amount of teams in this conference. It all of a sudden changed. And when people went to plug those numbers in, it probably took them a little while to go ahead and recalibrate everything to get to this point. So, Dad, to me, and the actuality of that situation, again, Oregon is in the Big Ten championships. There are 10 scenarios right now and 8 scenarios where the Ducks are the number 1 seed in all of this. There's a couple of outcomes dependent on Ohio State and Indiana, obviously, first and foremost this week, to decide who they'll face and potentially in what order there. Penn State needs basically 3 losses to happen over the next couple of weeks in order to have an outside chance of working their way in. So it is, I should say, 8 of those 10 scenarios where it is Indiana or Ohio State facing Oregon in the Big Ten title, and then 2 scenarios where you'd get Penn State finding their way in through the wreckage of all of this. So, I don't know, Dad. It'll be very interesting to watch that. We already dealt with this sort of in the SEC tiebreaker situation that we had going on for a little bit when we thought 3-loss LSU team might work its way to the championship. So maybe they need to hire you to do the math on this. Maybe that's the secret.
No, they don't need to hire me. This is far more difficult than simple math of flashcards that I was very good at. This is way more in depth. This is out of my league. I would just be throwing darts and making a guess, which quite honestly might be a better way.
You know what? Speaking of simple, coming up next, I'm going to make this tease really simple. Deion Sanders the Dallas Cowboys? Question mark? We'll give you the answer next on GoJo and Golic.
What would you think of that marriage if it might come together, Jerry and Deion?
Look, I think the NFL overall is exactly, the NFL needs someone like Deion Sanders, quite honestly. He fits the NFL. It's a matter of whether or not the NFL fits him.
You heard it there. ESPN's Louis Riddick says that Deion fits the NFL, okay? But does the NFL fit him back? I mean, does it even matter, though? If Deion wants to stay in college, here's what Diana Rossini has to say about that.
How real do you think the Deion Sanders stuff to Dallas is?
It's not real.
Really?
Just from the conversations I've had. I think Deion actually wants to stay in college. We'll start there. I know he's been public about that as well. But talking to some people close to him, they've shared with me that he likes where he's at. He likes the space he's in. That could change. Of course it could change. But in terms of Dallas, I don't think that that's a realistic option for them. I think that they're going to be looking more towards a coach with experience in the league and not do a first-time head coach scenario. I don't think they're against that idea of a former player turned head coach. I just don't believe that that's the direction that they're going to go in for now.
No, Diana, stop using reason. We want to get crazy here. We want to talk about Deion to Jerry world. Come on, let us hope. I mean, it seems like we're all just like willing this to happen because it would be absolutely hysterical. But what do you guys think?
Man, I tell you what, First Take has been trying to will this into existence for so long, so I'm so happy for them and the producers there that this is finally getting some realistic traction because, Dad, this is a sports media nirvana that would be created if all of a sudden you were able to even remotely realistically join these two forces here. I personally don't think it's going to happen right now. I would say, how about this, Dad? Would you think it would be more likely that Deion Sanders would jump to the NFL and take a job with a team like the Dallas Cowboys or leave for a bigger job in college football somewhere else?
Well, I think definitely staying in college. I don't think, and I'm not sure I agree with Lewis that said the NFL needs Deion. I don't think that at all. I think, and I'm going to use a word that's going to sound bad, but I don't mean it bad. I think Deion is better for college because he's kind of preachy to kids, and that's the word that maybe isn't sounding, but I'm using it in a positive way. 18 to 22-year-olds, he's, talks about class and talks about, being a good person. And I know he's kind of, he's prime time and he's a lot of glitter, but I do think he is trying to help the young men. And we know that doesn't carry to the pros. These are grown men who are playing professional ball. And there's also the great player that tries to coach at the top level when those players don't play at his level, right? I see frustration in Deion when he's at the pro level and those pros aren't able to do what he says or he did. I think college is perfect for him to mold the players. And what's a bigger job? I mean, we talk about going to Florida State. And we'll just use that as an example. Maybe only because he went there. But is that the bigger job now? I mean, Colorado, look what he's building. He's getting recruits. He's got that 5-star left tackle. He's getting big recruits. I know he's losing Shador. I know he's losing Travis. But can he get other big-time transfers, especially if he's in the Big 12 championship game? I mean, going to another school where you're kind of starting over, and you don't know what you have. Yes, there are bigger schools out there with bigger draws. I get it. But what he's building at Colorado, especially if they all of a sudden play in the Big 12 championship game, there's only 4 power conferences and only 8 teams in the country playing in championship games, and they could be one of them.
They could be. At the same time, and you're right, listen, you mentioned some of the recruiting wins already, even though we know high school recruiting is not something that Deion, he said himself, prioritizes because of what you have available to you in the sport now. Julian Lewis, one of the top high school quarterbacks, is decommitted and has now opened up his recruiting again, and Colorado's one of the schools that has ties to him, so that could be a major coup for them. All those things are valid points, Dad. I still think right now Deion Sanders, like everybody else, sort of understands. And Florida State's a good example. His alma mater there, certainly a program with a ton of prestige, one that's been trying for the last couple of years to pry their way potentially out of the ACC and now has suffered the indignity of this season. Still probably understands in his heart of hearts college football going forward is going to be a 2-conference world in the Big Ten of the SEC. And so if one of those programs in one of those major conferences came calling, I'm sure that would still be something that's appealing to Deion, the competitor, because that's the one part of me here, Dad, that struggles to say no entirely to would Deion entertain the NFL. Now, to be clear, Deion Sanders was asked about this in a press conference and said, the kickstand is down. I am happy where I'm at. Tried to put out those, didn't out and out dismiss it, but dismissed it enough to where I'm going to take the man at his word and say he says he wants to be here. But you brought up the fact, and I'll say twofold in terms of could Deion do it in the NFL? He's a hyper competitor, so maybe that is something that's appealing to him. But also, he's a guy that I'm sure could adjust his game. It was an adjustment going from Jackson State to a place in FBS football in Colorado and the things that were going to be asked of you there. And it would be adjustment to the NFL to, hey, these are professionals. This is a level of football he excelled at. The same way he excelled in college in ways that most of his players south of Travis Hunter and Shador aren't excelling, and he's still finding a way to be successful there. So I wouldn't say it's something that is outside of his abilities, certainly, because we see great players on the field adjust all the time. I'm sure he could now adjust as a coach, but it is still a seismic jump. It is a massive shift in style on what's asked of you. And I do wonder if at this point, if that's something he genuinely wants. That's what we don't know. We're hearing it through intermediaries right now, but we still yet to hear it from the man himself, who's got plenty of microphones to tell us if he wants.
And we talk about a pride thing too. What's a goal? Is it a goal to coach at the top level? Then the goal is to coach in the NFL. But there have been plenty of college coaches who have been very satisfied with coaching in the upper echelon of college and had opportunities to go to the NFL and turn them down because they wanted to stay in college. So I mean, I played in the era with Deion. I played against him when I was at Notre Dame. He was at Florida State. And certainly, now we were both on the defensive side of the ball, so we never played against each other in a game physically against each other. But I'm sure he has the pride of wanting to be the best, but does that include coaching at the highest level? And as far as going to the Big Ten or the SEC, what's better? And it all depends on what job is available. A mid to lower tier team in a big conference or a better team in the Big 12.
I'll say this. I still think it's being in one of those teams because we're going to watch in the next few years. I don't think this is all going to stay the same. I think the SEC and the Big Ten are going to continue to bully their way into more at the table than everybody else here and make it even harder for these other conferences to work their way into the fold. And, Dad, I would also say this. We're watching what Deion Sanders did at Colorado right now, which it was not is a program with a lot of history, but in recent years had fallen way off that standard. There were very few kids now being recruited that remembered any of the heyday of Colorado football. Same could kind of be true for Indiana in the Big Ten. That's not a program that's had any football history of value, really. Right. And now Curt Cignetti in year one has them as a playoff contender in that conference. And so I think with the resources, especially with the windfall of new TV money that's coming to those places, you could take what Deion Sanders did at Colorado and say, why couldn't you do that at a middle-of-the-pack Big Ten or SEC team with all the resources available to you, knowing that, hey, with the strength of schedule that we're seeing with the SEC right now in the Big Ten, you'd have a pretty strong foothold inside the main conversation in the sport in the CFP.
It is true, and obviously Deion has a following. Players go to play for Deion, and especially players that I've seen in 2 years. He went from, he took a team that was horrible to the possibility of a Big 12 championship. And in this era of open transfer portaling, you're right. He could build a Midland to lower team up in the big conference up. So that is very true. And maybe that's where pride would take him, to build a bigger conference, one of the big two conferences, build a team up. Yeah, I just don't know about the NFL. Again, I agree with you. I think he could adjust and probably do well. I have no idea. It's just like for a player, it's a huge jump from college to the pro, and for a coach, it is a monster jump from college to pro. Monster. And you rarely see, Jesse, the improvement or the success of a college coach going to the NFL.
I agree, but let's just play along, okay, with this game here. If Deion wants to go to the NFL, would it be somewhere with Travis Hunter or Shedeur? He's indicated that they're going to dictate where they'll want to be. So package deal for Deion. Michael Irvin has sources.
That if Shedeur went to the Cowboys, Deion would accept the job.
I believe 100%. And I can tell you, good sources have told me that.
Good sources. Okay. Well, yeah.
Shedeur is not going to the Dallas Cowboys. They just paid Dak Prescott. I mean, come on. What are we doing here?
Jerry's crazy, man. Come on. You never know.
That's the other factor in all of this, too, Dad, is we can talk about would Deion leverage his candidacy as bait for NFL teams trying to help his son or Travis Hunter, who feels like his other son at this point? No disrespect to Shiloh. But the other part of this is the Jerry Jones factor of it all. because Deion Sanders, I don't know if he'd be a viable candidate for every NFL franchise because he is a massive personality that comes in here. You've seen what follows Deion Sanders, and it's different than pretty much every head coach you'd have in the NFL because of the star power. I mean, hell, you and I were this last weekend sitting around, and we saw the previews for Deion Sanders having his own talk show during the week right now. As a standing FBS Division I college football coach, having his own Tuesday talk show, going and discussing what's going on in the rest of the world, like, it's all abnormal, and that's not going to be for every franchise. But Dallas and Jerry Jones are just different enough and love the circus of all of this enough to say, hey, you've got a guy who is no doubt trending upward and now at 2 different stops is accomplished at a really high level as a coach here. So he's got those bona fides that he can point to, even if some people disagree with the methodology, but could still say, all right, there's enough there to combine that with the fact that he was successful and would have that same cachet in NFL circles amongst players that grew up idolizing this guy and watching him play, that Jerry Jones would also look and say, man, you know what would throw everyone off the scent of all the bad that's been going on in my organization? What if I hired Deion Sanders? That seems like something tailor-made for Jerry Jones, and so that's why I can't out and out dismiss this.
Okay, all right, I get that, and I get the other reason to hire him is Deion is not going to, want to be the GM as well. Jerry can keep being the GM.
Yeah,
I get that, but let's not throw Shedeur into the equation. Shedeur is not going to the Dallas Cowboys. They just paid Dak a ton of money. You know what the money they would burn on that, and they'd have to get somebody to trade for Dak. That's not happening. I know we're trying to play along with this game, but we've got to stay somewhat in the practical lane here of possibilities. Shedeur is not going to be the quarterback next year of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I will give you the fact that it would not be out of the realm of Jerry to hire Deion for the circus of it all. And he doesn't even need to hire Deion for the Cowboys to be a circus. They are, no matter what. They are the most talked about team in all of pro sports, but we do know Jerry likes to add to the circus, and that certainly would.
No, I do agree with you. In so many ways, the Dak Prescott situation secure. It is going to be interesting, though, to watch. I mean, we talked about last year in the modern world of college football, the NFL, the way that the landscape has changed for so many of these guys who are now resourced in college in a way that they never were before and maybe have a little more leverage. As we talked about Caleb Williams and his camp maybe trying to influence some of the draft process last year. We've seen a very famous family go about trying to also influence the top of the draft process in the Mannings all those years ago. And while Shedeur Sanders, we talked about, if he's in last year's draft, probably not even in the top 6 or 7 of the quarterbacks going out, but this year's a different story, and there will be a lot of lobbying that goes on. I will be curious to see what they try and do, seeing the way certain franchises have doomed certain quarterbacks who have come out in the draft here recently. So, man, the word cloud for a first take headline that has come out of sports in the last couple of days has been incredible. Coming up next, we'll try and sort through all of what's gone on, especially in the NFL, with Moose Johnston joining us here on GoJo and Golic. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. As we mentioned, there's been a bunch of wild news in and around the NFL this week. And so to help us sift through all of that and to look ahead a bit at the upcoming weekend, delighted to be joined by two-time Super Bowl champion and current Fox Sports football analyst, Daryl Moose Johnston, kind enough to join us. Three-time, my mistake. That was a typo on the board. Did not mean to ruin that. I did a little Ron Burgundy action there, Moose. I apologize here. Didn't want to shortchange you a ring. How are you?
Good. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Moose, I made the same mistake once texting Zach Martin and talking to him about his career. He had jumped up in a celebration. I said, not bad for 7 years into the league. And he goes, it's 8. Don't shortchange me. These are hard earned. And so I understand the correction completely.
Yeah, we don't need to keep talking about his Super Bowl wins. That was during my era on the Eagles. So we can just move past that.
Yeah, I still try to figure out, Mike, how you guys did not win a Super Bowl during 90, 91, 92.
Yeah. We all on our defense are trying to figure that out as well. 30 years later.
Well, while they try and sort that out, Moose, let's try and sort out your old team a little bit. You're on the calls. We mentioned Vikings at Bears this weekend, which we certainly want to get into. Awesome division matchup and the Caleb Williams factor in that game as we continue to legislate his first year in the league. But your former team, the Dallas Cowboys, has been in the news a lot lately, and the injuries continuing to pile up here. Dak Prescott on the shelf right now. How difficult has this been to watch as a former Cowboy? We see the pride that so many guys that have worn the star have in this organization. To see what's happened this year, how tough has that been?
It's been hard. I think the biggest thing is because it's been such a surprise. I know that he didn't do a lot in the offseason, and that was a concern for a lot of the fan base. But you kind of looked at, okay, you've got to get Dak Prescott under contract. You got to get CeeDee Lamb under contract, or you're going to try to get Micah Parsons under contract. So there were some big ticket items that they had to get taken care of. And I do like rewarding players based off of the work that they've done for you coming into that contract. So, maybe that impacts their ability to get things done in the offseason. But at 12-5, 12-5, 12-5, the last 3 years, I don't think anybody saw fall off the cliff like this when you've got some of that talent there. And then the injuries happened early in the season and definitely impacted the defense a little bit. I think the one thing for me that's been troubling is the struggles that the offensive line has had. I think we saw flashes of the guys individually, but that starting five hasn't been able to come together. And there were some injuries in there as camp started and different things. But the offensive line for me is where everything starts. And that's been probably the most disappointing thing up until this point.
So you mentioned 12-5 3 times and now a down year this year. Can the Cowboys, or really any team in the NFL, can they turn it around in a year looking towards next year for Dallas?
In a year, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think right now what you have to do to finish out this year is find out about Trey Lance. I think that needs to be paramount right now. I think we all know who Cooper Rush is, and but you need to find out about Trey Lance and give him an opportunity. Does he fit into this system? Does his skill set make him a really reliable and potentially successful backup quarterback, in this system? That's priority number one for me. And then you've got to continue to be, competitive down the stretch. But if there's areas on that roster that you need to check it during the course of the end of the season. You're out of the playoff hunt. It's time to really kind of to start looking towards next year. And I know that's hard as you're trying to finish out a year. But we were a part of this in '89 in Dallas at 1-15, and I think a lot of people forget we were 3-7 in 1990. So. It was pretty challenging. You're 4-22 over a year and a half plus, and you're not seeing much success with all the hard work that you've put in. So I understand kind of juggling, completing one season and looking forward to the next, but I think that's something that Dallas has to do right now.
How much of this falls on the shoulders of Jerry Jones? So you mentioned you were there at the beginning of Jerry Jones's tenure, watched him as the architect for so many of the great years. How much of the failings of this season do fall on him?
I think it's always a group. It's always a group effort, whether it's winning or when you have a tough season, there's responsibility that goes across the board. It's never one thing. If it was one thing, they'd be able to fix it and move on. We have that conversation with coaches during the course of the season, and how come you guys can't score when you start that second half? And you're like, listen, if we could have figured it out, you don't think we would have figured it out by now? So it's always a combination of things that are impacting the results that you'd like to have. So yeah, every single one of those, every single person, at the Star has to shoulder their responsibility for this. And Jerry will be the first one to step up and take his responsibility on his shoulders. Mike McCarthy, he's going to shoulder his responsibility. It goes across the board. Winning is never because of one person, one group, one side of the football. It's always a team effort. And the same thing when you have one of those tough years. In 1989, it was not issues here or there. It was issues across the board, and we just had to get those fixed and start moving forward.
Want to get to the Bears and Vikings, but news again in the NFL. The Jets obviously demoted their OC and Nathaniel Hackett, fired their coach and Robert Saleh, now fired the GM and Joe Douglas. So there'll be a clean sweep from GM to coach next year. Will the quarterback be back next year? Do you think Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of the Jets next year?
I think that's their big decision that they have to make. It's not the same Aaron Rodgers that we've seen play during the course of his career. I remember one of the games down here in Dallas, the playoff game down here with the throw that he made to the left sideline and then kicking the field goal to win that game. I didn't even remember, maybe 2012. Just phenomenal. He's had an incredible career, but Father Time is undefeated. And, everybody's skills diminish as your career wears on. And, I think that's a long, hard look for the Jets organization. What is the value by doing maybe one more year? Does the new head coach, does the new general manager, do all these new people that you've created this opportunity to come into the organization really want to be in that position where they have Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback? So I think there's a lot of questions that have to be answered in that New York Jets organization. Is crazy as Dallas can be from season to season, the Jets are in the middle of a tough one as well.
Yeah, there was another owner that stepped to the table and said, I would like my moment in the media here, and Woody Johnson and what's gone on with the Jets and the reporting here. So certainly chaotic situation there. We got a few minutes here now, Moose. Your game this weekend, Bears-Vikings. Vikings team still in pole position in the wild card spot in the NFC, and the Bears trying to make the most of Caleb Williams' rookie season after the change at coordinator. What are you most excited to see coming up this Sunday in this game?
A couple of things. We had Chicago against New England prior to Shane Waldron being fired. So what is the difference in the offense now that they've made that change? And I think what you're hearing about is really the communication, the play getting called into the huddle in time, the huddle breaking, getting to the line of scrimmage with more time at the line of scrimmage. And that's going to help Caleb Williams in that situation if you have afforded him the opportunity to make changes at the line of scrimmage. So I think that there's a pace that they're playing with that they like. We always tried to figure out going into that New England game, what happened to DJ Moore? What happened to Cole Kmet? Why are these guys more involved in this offense? And I think you saw that last week against Green Bay. You saw the skill players all being able to have touches with the football. And when you have a good group like Chicago has, you've got to be able to do that. Again, it's the offensive line. That offensive line has been in disarray all season long. I think they were in their 11th starting five when we had them against New England 2 weeks ago. So, how has that been impacted with the ball coming out a little bit quicker and Caleb Williams not holding it? And then on the other side, I really want to see Minnesota. I'm a big Kevin O'Connell fan. I love what he's done with Sam Darnold. I heard you mention it. I can't remember the phrase you used specifically, but, quarterbacks that get into with timing and circumstance, the wrong team, the wrong time, and they really struggle. And I think that's been a case for Sam Darnold throughout his career. And now that he's around Kevin O'Connell, and we saw what Kevin O'Connell did for Kirk Cousins, we're seeing that same thing with Sam Darnold. He's one of my favorite coaches to talk to. But I think the great thing about Minnesota is the ability for them to find a way to win games. And there's so many teams around the NFL right now kind of caught in that clump in the middle that haven't figured that one out. Minnesota, because of their first year under Kevin O'Connell, they had a down year last year, but they know how to win games.
They know how to win games. They'll have that opportunity this weekend. Again, Moose Johnston on the call. Vikings at Bears, 1 o'clock Eastern on Fox, the 3-time Super Bowl champion. Moose, we appreciate the time today. Thanks so much, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Good visiting with you guys. Take care. Take care, Mike.
Thanks, Daryl.
Coming up next, we'll finish up with this, that, and the third. Subway innovating yet again in 2024. Who knew? All right, time to finish up the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you to everyone who's watched. Hit subscribe and the bell over there. And if you miss us or any of our great guests, and that includes Daryl Moose Johnston, the 3-time Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys, kind enough to join us before his call this weekend of Vikings-Bears. You can check that out wherever you get our podcast or right here as soon as we get done on YouTube. This segment, This, That, and the Third, is brought to you by our friends over at Knockaround. Head to knockaround.com and use promo code GoJo Golic for your go-to pair of polarized shades. And Dad is on the road and a loser who didn't bring his sunglasses, so now he has to sit here and watch me and Jesse protect our eyes from these in-studio cameras while he just raw dogs it, Dad. Shame on you.
That's my bad. That's E2 here. That's my fault.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. You see how cool me and Jesse look right now, and here you are with your naked face out here looking like an idiot. So I feel bad for you. Don't wind up like my father. Head to knockaround.com, use promo code GoJo Golic, and make sure that you look fresh, clean, and are protected from the sun at prices that won't break the bank here. Dad, let's rebound for you nicely here and get to this. The folks at Subway, who have spent an unbelievable amount on marketing. And by the way, Subway, call us. Ate a lot of Subway as a kid. We lived, Dad, you remember this, right down the street from a Subway in Avon, Connecticut that we would go to religiously after practices, all this stuff that we would eat absolutely out of house and home. So call us if you want to continue to help provide the brand. We are ready to help. And in that, helping with their new foot-long Oreo, Dad, according to the Snackolator account on Twitter, in January, approximately around January 6th, we believe that Subway is going to take the foot-long cookie that we got to sample at last year's Super Bowl in Las Vegas and now fill it with Oreo cream and top it with Oreo cookies. I will be not walking, not running. I will be Usain Bolt sprinting to Subway on January 6th, which, boy, an inauspicious date to do this, but we will... I'm not even going to make the joke. Dad, how excited are you for this?
Oh, wow. Listen, I will pull a hammy getting to that foot-long Oreo. I'm a Oreo freak. I'm a chocolate freak. Jesse, you're giving that look that's just going to annoy Mike and I like it's something you won't try.
No, I'm not going to go try it. If you brought it in here and you were like, you have to try it, I would try it. But it's just whatever.
It's just what? It's just an
Oreo. It's a foot of it. It's a foot of Oreo. And I will say, the Subway foot-long cookie that they debuted already, softer than you would anticipate. Like, the quality of that, I figured for something highly manufactured and mass-produced was going to lack. And it was soft, it was warm, it was delicious. If they bring the energy they brought from that to this version of it with the Oreo here, I am going to melt. I'm going to pass out and die.
Yeah, I don't think Oreos are good, honestly. They just taste, they're not good.
Okay.
They're not good.
Okay.
You guys are like addicted to the chemicals in them. A Levain bakery cookie,
Lord.
That's delicious. I will eat that all day. An Oreo cookie, like it tastes like plastic. I'm not into it.
Oh,
Heavenly Father,
Jesse.
we are here today just asking that you bless and save our sweet friend Jessie Cofield. She sins, but not out of her direct desire to, but because she knows not what she says and she does not yet understand the blessing of the Oreo cookie. Heavenly Father, we pray that you can heal her heart right now. Dad, I know this is hurting you as a type 2 diabetic, son of a type 2 diabetic here. This is against your culture entirely.
This shouldn't shock us with Jessie. We have definitely had we've hit roadblocks with her and foods we've eaten and food she's eaten. We don't like caviar. She does like caviar.
Oh, God,
so I think right there.
One time.
I'll pull back on that. Actually, I actually had caviar for the first time like a month ago. Pretty good. Again, wouldn't seek it out. The way I'm going to seek out this foot-long Oreo cookie at Subway is not the same way I'd seek out caviar. But if you bring it to me on a cracker, I will eat it and I will enjoy the weird texture and the little bit of saltiness there. So, Jesse, hopefully we won't come to blows over this the same way these pickleball people did. Let's get to that.
Yeah, so this is when pickleball goes extremely wrong. Okay, so check out the end of this tournament. We have video of what went down. Things got heated when they went up to do the handshake at the end. Somebody's paddle got knocked out of their hands, and the loser then kicked the winner in the face as he goes to pick up his paddle. The guy apparently lost his memory for about 3 hours, but he's okay. He's not pressing charges. This is what I imagine was going down when you guys were talking about your family getting really heated when you guys were playing pickleball, but I'm guessing nobody got drilled in the face.
Listen, I can't now. So the one guy on the winning team reached over the net to pick up the paddle, and dude kicked him square in the face.
After he knocked the paddle out of his hand.
Yeah, after he knocked the paddle out of his hand. You would still be trying to pull me. If I was that guy's partner and saw my partner get kicked in the face, you would still be trying to pry me off of that guy. I can't believe how quickly I'd have been on that guy, just pounding his head into the ground. Not that that I condone, answering violence with violence, but in this case I do. Kick dude right in the face. Dude needs to get pulverized.
And didn't he knock the paddle out of his hand? So he knocks the paddle, and then the guy's just trying to pick up his paddle.
So, the guy who got kicked in the face was the one that knocked the paddle out of Buddy's hand.
Still doesn't deserve a kick in the face.
He was kind of the aggressor in this situation to start. He had won the point. He came over there with a lot of piss and vinegar. He got a little over his skis. That does not necessitate that you get kicked in the face. I'm with you, Dad. When I came to him, we're glad that Buddy came to him, was all right later, and has no lingering issues, it seems. The first question I am asking is not, where is this dude? It's, where were you to my partner who went over there and like got in his grill a little bit, but I didn't see one punch thrown there. And I'm sorry, this is like a fight on the football field where you go back and watch the tape. The eye in the sky don't lie. If I don't see you running towards the pile, we're going to have questions about how much teammates we are.
Without question. That dude should have been flying over, and there shouldn't have been a word spoken. Not a word spoken. It should have been a full-on tackle and beat dude's head in. I mean, that was.
I will bring us back to
Happy
reality
birthday
and
to the
say
ground.
this isn't a pile on the football field, and like assault charges are real. So I just will say I think he showed admirable restraint.
Yeah, wouldn't be my teammate anymore.
Clearly. Yeah, that's true. You're probably finding a different pickleball partner after that either way, because, again, I understand. And listen, assault charges didn't get filed here to begin with. So there are, again, you know what? Honestly, I just want to make the joke at the beginning. Clearly, they couldn't stand the heat, so they need to get out of the kitchen.
Okay.
That's all I'll say. Jesse, let's finish off with the third here in a dude's rock moment for the ages.
Yeah, so this guy is taking the internet by storm. Apparently, he shows up to his 9:30 a.m. geography class, like different days, every day he has a different jersey on or something. There's like a TikTok video of him just showing up every day in a different jersey. Is this the male equivalent of a woman walking into another woman's walk-in closet? Like, it seems like this guy is just infatuated with this dude's jersey collection.
Well, what I have to ask is, guy with the jersey collection, I mean, it's not like jerseys are cheap. I mean, dude has got to spent a lot of money on these jerseys.
Yeah, he's fancy.
And there's some gems in this bunch here. So it's every Tuesday and Thursday at 9:30 at this geography class, which, by the way, shout out to him for sitting in the front row, being very attentive, being engaged in the material. Clearly, probably knows a thing or two about geography, which is helpful considering the depth and breadth of geography his jerseys span. So far, it's been a Paul Konerko throwback, the Luka Doncic All-Star jersey, DeAndre Ayton, Russell Wilson's Action Green Seahawks jersey, Ricky Williams orange jersey, Steve Largent, LeBron James, Jackson Smith and Jigba, probably the most recent to go along with Aaron Judge, Nick Van Exel. Could do without the Karl Malone jersey in there, but all in all, Dad, I was never a huge jersey guy. I had one jersey. It was the Donovan. God, why am I blanking right now on what jersey this was? Anyway, Dad, I was never a big jersey guy. Were you growing up?
No, I was never a jersey guy. And I see in the list of jerseys, one class he had no jersey. Want to know what was going on there. And the worst look is when you wear a jersey and you tuck it into your jeans. That's just a big
That's
no-no.
a bad look. Jersey with the hoodie underneath, better look. The jersey I had, Donovan McNabb's high school Mount Carmel basketball jersey, only time I dipped into the waters here. Either way, salute to this man for the dedication and the attentiveness in class. Salute to you for the attention and dedication here. Almost got me. Download, subscribe, rate, review. I love you guys. We'll talk to you tomorrow.